Hey guys, welcome to Coding After 30. I hope you guys doing great. So last video I talked about my experience of getting my first job. In this video I want to talk about my experience learning to code and all the mistakes I made. Well, probably if I talk about all the mistakes I made, this video is going to be forever long, so I'll just talk about the most important ones. By the way, my name is Paul, and if you're interested in switching careers into web development later in life, that's what I talk about on this channel. So if this is something that interests you, consider subscribing. So let's jump into the video. Alright guys, here's the thing. Learning to code is not easy. And the only reason a lot of people talk about boot camps working is because they do work with the right people. But the truth is, a lot of people that do talk about boot camps, about being able to learn to code in 3 months and getting that $150,000 job, are people that are selling products or selling those boot camps. By the way, there are legitimate boot camps out there. So I'm not saying this to say that boot camps are bad. Honestly, I wish I went to boot camp, but I didn't. And obviously I would have done my due diligence and picked the right bootcamp for me. If you're looking and interested in C# development, the guys that I like a lot are Coder Foundry. So if you're interested in the bootcamp, go check them out. They don't pay me anything. I just like the fact that they're really honest about everything they do. So if that's something that you're interested in, consider checking them out. But the truth is, you don't need to go to a bootcamp. Sometimes it's easier because you have a path that you could follow, which actually will save you a lot of time. And a lot of bootcamps, they're big investment, not just in money, but time. And because you live and breathe code, it's a great way to get started. But it's not gonna help you if you're just starting out and you've never done coding before. You should prepare yourself. So for most of us, self-taught route is the way to go. And the biggest mistake that a lot of us make when beginning to learn, we just don't know what to learn. So we jump language to language. We don't have a clear path. And that's kind of what I did for many, many years. So I'm 39 years old right now, but I started coding on and off for a very long time. If I was more focused, more dedicated in terms of learning the right things, not kind of fluttering around, I would have gotten to my first job much faster. So the most important thing to do is to keep focus. And when you're starting out, instead of just jumping into learning to code something, you actually have to figure out what to learn and you have to have a path. So I've jumped around from Python to Ruby to PHP, all these different things. And over the years, I basically learned nothing. I started making progress when my friend told me, it's like, look, you just have to stop and you have to pick one thing, one path that you want to follow. And he's a React JavaScript developer, and basically he told me about that path that I should follow. And that's when things started working out for me, is when I started to follow a path. Now, if you're not sure what the path is, what I recommend, go on Glassdoor or any one of those sites, Indeed.com, and just search for jobs that are available in your area and see what technologies they're using and what things are in demand. Some people take the ASP.NET and C# path, legitimate path. I decided to take JavaScript and React. So when I decided to get really focused about doing the right thing, the first thing I started with is learning HTML and CSS. I stopped doing everything else. I made sure that I understood the basics of HTML and CSS, and I was able to take a design and, as best as I can, recreate that design with HTML and CSS. That's a must. Once I finished with that, I basically did a JavaScript course. Actually, a bunch of them. I recommend starting with one and doing everything and understanding 80% or 90% before you move on. But I jumped around. That was a big mistake. I should have just stayed focused, did one course, and really focused on learning and practicing the things I was learning rather than trying to get to the finish line of completing the course. So learning JavaScript, I basically spent just enough time in JavaScript to understand the basic of the language and to understand the basics of DOM manipulation with JavaScript. But my React friend told me, he's like, look, even though there's a lot of DOM manipulation in JavaScript, it's not exactly how React works. So once you understand the basics, don't spend any more time and jump into React. So you could start being more productive with React. And that's what I did. And I spent a lot of time, like a year at least, just focusing on React. And it was very difficult. Once I finally started to understand React, the big thing in React, especially back then, was this concept of state and state management. And so one of the most common things to use to manage state, and it is still now, is learning Redux, which took me forever. And I still don't 100% understand it, but I'm able to work with it if I look at the documentation. So then I spent time learning Redux, and by the time I finished learning Redux, they had styled components came out for React, and I kind of really liked using style components versus just doing the normal CSS or learning Sass, which I learned both. So just to review up to this point, I had a very straight path, which I focused on learning HTML and CSS first. Then I spent 2.5 months on JavaScript, just learning the basics. And then I spent like a year combined learning React and improving my JavaScript. Once after that, I decided to, well, because I had to learn Redux because it was very widely used back then, and also jumped into style components. And the reason why I did that is because there's many ways to create a React app and style it, and I just really like style components. And the job that I have now, by the way, and based on a lot of the other people that I talk to, it's commonly used library for React. After that, after I understood how to make front-end basic application with React, managing state, I had to learn about APIs. I had to learn about this idea that that app that you're creating, it has data that is being populated from somewhere. And that comes from a backend. It comes from a database. So the first thing I did is I made sure to start doing a lot of projects utilizing APIs that are already available for free. So all you need to do is just go to the website, read the documentation, and all of a sudden you have these endpoints that you could connect to via your app and do stuff. Like there's an excellent app where you could look up different types of cocktail drinks that you want. So one of the projects I did was basically an app where you could search how to make any possible drink that you can, and where does it get the data? It gets it from the API. Once I understood the concept of getting the data from the API and using it, I started diving into understanding how does a backend work. And there's many different ways that you could have a backend. You could do it with JavaScript like Node.js and Express. You could also do it with C# and ASP.NET. You could even have a PHP backend, many the Python backend. But the point is, what backend does, it basically creates an endpoint for you where you could connect via your front end and be able to make API calls that allow you to basically perform some sort of CRUD application or CRUD functionality where you could create things, read things, update things, and delete things, or basically in those terms like get, post, patch, and delete. And so once I understood that, I dived into learning databases. And the two databases that I focused on, because they're very common, I focused on MongoDB first, and then I switched to SQL because it is more common. And in the majority of companies that I looked to apply, a lot of them were working with MySQL or some sort of version of MySQL. So what I would recommend is basically once you learn the front end is make sure that you understand the idea of databases, how they work, how to be able to query data, how to be able to find the data that you are changing when you're working with the API. So with that being said, it's like a lot of things to learn. And everything I just said to you guys, that's still what I am consistently trying to improve on. So I shut my mind from learning other things. Like the only thing that I didn't mention that I started learning because it's required in my job is C# and ASP.NET. But that's after a year of doing all that other stuff. So the point that I'm trying to make is that once you decide your path, you have to stick to it. And anytime you kind of get off the path, you have to understand it's going to slow you way down. It's going to kill your synergy, and it's going to be very difficult to make any type of gains while learning. The moral of the story is you don't have to follow the path that I outlined here, but you do need to have a path. You need to have a roadmap. And the best way to find it is to not listen to people like me or anybody else on YouTube that are telling you, but it's actually Google and see what companies are hiring for. Sometimes you have to do a little bit deciphering because a lot of those companies postings are written by the HR department, which basically name every possible thing they can. But basically you need to understand the most common stacks that are out there for development and just do that. And I don't know a lot about Python, but if you decide to do Python and machine learning, that's all you do. If you decide to do ASP.NET that's what you do, because you could create whole front-end and back-end apps using their MVC pattern and do very well. And there's a lot of demand for that. If you decide to learn React and JavaScript, that's what you do, but don't go meandering around trying to learn every possible thing you can. That's impossible. So that's what I wanted to tell you guys. Have a plan. If you're not sure what to do and you have any questions, you could always ask me in the comments below. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you found some value out of this video. Again, I always want to keep it real with you. So thanks for watching. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you guys next time.